If this video showed up for you, it's because this story is going to move you and give you chills. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of story, and comment which city you're watching from. The subway station smelled of ozone, damp concrete, and the metallic tang of screeching brakes. For most people, this was just a transition point, a blur of gray tiles and flickering lights between work and home. But for John, it was the closest thing to a living room he had left. He sat on a flattened cardboard box near the far end of the platform, tucked away in the shadows, where the overhead lights buzzed with a dying yellow flicker. He was invisible here. Hundreds of shoes passed him every hour, shiny leather Oxfords, muddy sneakers, high heels clicking with purpose. John knew the world by its footwear. He knew who was rushing, who was dragging their feet, and who was lost. But no one ever looked down. To the city above, John was just a heap of worn clothes and a gray beard, a statue of misfortune that was easier to ignore than to acknowledge. The cold draft from the incoming trains bit through his thin jacket, settling into his bones like a permanent ache. He rubbed his calloused hands together, trying to generate a spark of warmth. His stomach gave a hollow growl, a reminder that it had been 2 days since his last real meal, just half a sandwich found on a bench. But hunger was a familiar ghost. He'd learned to live with its haunting presence. He closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of the city underground, waiting for the night to deepen so the police wouldn't chase him out. He thought this night would be exactly like the 1,000 nights before it. But he had no idea that his life was about to change forever in the next 5 minutes. It started with a sensation, not a sound, a persistent, frantic tugging at his frayed sleeve. John opened his eyes, startled. He expected a security guard telling him to move along, or maybe a drunken commuter looking for trouble. Instead, he looks down to see a ball of matted fur trembling violently against his leg. It was a puppy. A mixed breed, mostly dirt and bones, with ears that were too big for its head. The little creature wasn't begging for food, it wasn't sniffing at John's empty pockets, it was pulling. It clamped its tiny jaws onto the fabric of John's coat and yanked backward, whining with a pitch that cut straight through the subway's noise. "Hey, easy there, little one," John rasped, his voice rough from disuse. He tried to gently pry the puppy away. "I got nothing for you. You're barking at the wrong tree." But the puppy wouldn't let go. It let out a sharp, desperate bark, looking deep into John's eyes with an intensity that human beings rarely showed. There was terror in those dark eyes. Pure, unadulterated panic. The dog released his sleeve, ran a few feet towards the edge of the platform where the darkness of the tunnel began, and then stopped, looking back at John. It barked again, a pleading sound that echoed off the tiled walls. John looked around. The platform was emptying out. A late train had just left. "Go on," John whispered, waving a hand. "Go find someone with a home." The puppy didn't move. It ran back to him, nudged his hand with a cold, wet nose, and then darted back to the tunnel's edge. It was clearly asking him to follow. John felt a strange tightness in his chest. He knew the rules. You don't go into the tunnels. It's dangerous. There's the third rail, the maintenance trains, the rats the size of cats, and the suffocating darkness. But the way the animal looked at him, it was as if the dog knew John was the only soul in the city who wouldn't just walk away. The puppy whimpered, stepping one paw onto the narrow maintenance catwalk that ran alongside the tracks, vanishing into the shadows. It popped its head back out again, waiting. John sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. He looked at his tired hands, then at the empty station. He had nothing to lose, absolutely nothing. Ignoring the ache in his knees and the screaming protest of his survival instincts, John stood up. He grabbed his meager bundle of belongings and took a step towards the edge. He was about to step into the forbidden dark, guided only by a stray dog and a gut feeling that something terrible was waiting in the silence.
The first step off the platform felt like stepping off the edge of the world. The maintenance walkway was narrow, barely wide enough for his boots, and slick with a greasy residue that had accumulated over decades. As John moved past the boundary of the station lights, the darkness didn't just fall. It wrapped around him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The air instantly grew colder, smelling of stagnant water, rusts, and the ancient dust of the city's underground veins. He paused, his hand gripping a cold, slime-covered pipe on the wall for balance. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed too loud in the sudden silence. Behind him, the station was just a distant glow, a safe harbor he was leaving behind. Ahead, there was only the abyss and the clicking of the puppy's claws on the metal grating. "Wait up," John whispered, his voice trembling. He squinted, trying to adjust his eyes, but the tunnel swallowed light. He was walking blind into the belly of the beast. The puppy didn't wait. It let out a soft yip, sounding further away now. Panic spiked in John's chest. If he lost the dog, he would be alone in this maze, risking electrocution on the live rails that hummed with lethal power just feet below him. He shuffled forward, one cautious foot after another, trusting a creature he had met only minutes ago. Every shadow seemed to move. Every drip of water sounded like footsteps approaching. They walked for what felt like an hour, though it might have only been 10 minutes. The tunnel curved, cutting off the last line of sight to the station. Now, the only light came from the occasional spark of the third rail arcing in the distance, casting brief, ghostly flashes against the arched ceiling. John's breathing was ragged. His hunger had turned into a dull nausea, and his legs burned with exertion. "Why here?" John murmured to the darkness. "Where are you taking me?" The answer came not from the puppy, but from the environment itself. The smooth walls gave way to jagged concrete. They were entering an older section of the system, a place forgotten by the maintenance crews, where the air was thick and still. This was where the city hid its secrets. Suddenly, the puppy stopped. He couldn't see it, but he heard the frantic scratching of paws against wood. Old, rotting railway ties. He stopped too, freezing in place. A low vibration rumbled through the soles of his shoes. Was it a train? No, the rhythm was wrong. It was something else. Then he heard it. It started as a low whimper, barely audible over the hum of the electrical lines. Then it grew into a pained, guttural moan that echoed through the tunnel. It was a sound of pure suffering, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The puppy barked back, a high-pitched cry of reassurance, and scrambled down from the catwalk into the pit of the tracks. "No! Get back here!" John hissed, reaching into the blackness. He almost lost his balance. The drop was steep. If the puppy touched the third rail, it would be over in a flash of blue light. John's fear for the animal overrode his fear for himself. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a cheap plastic lighter, his only source of light. He flicked the wheel. The flames sputtered to life, a tiny, fragile orange beacon in the immense dark. What the flickering light revealed made John's stomach drop. The puppy was standing amidst a chaotic pile of debris, collapsed ceiling tiles, twisted rebar, and thick, heavy cables that had fallen from the wall. And there, buried beneath the wreckage, was a pair of eyes reflecting the flame. It was a larger dog, a German Shepherd mix, her body pinned awkwardly under a slab of concrete and a tangle of wires. She was panting heavily, her tongue lolling out, dust coating her matted fur. She tried to lift her head to look at her puppy, but collapsed back with a sharp whine of pain. The puppy was licking her face frantically, trying to dig at the concrete with paws that were far too small to make any difference. The mother looked at John. She didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. She just looked at him with a gaze so filled with exhaustion and plea that it hit him harder than a physical blow. John lowered himself down, avoiding the electrified rail by inches. The smell of copper, blood, was thick here. He brought the lighter closer. The slab of concrete across her hips was heavy, way too heavy for one man, let alone a man who hadn't eaten properly in days. He looked at the mother, then at the puppy who was now looking up at him, tail tucked, trembling. "Okay," John whispered, his voice breaking. "Okay, I'm here." He shoved the lighter into a crack in the wall to keep it upright. The shadows danced wildly as he rolled up his sleeves, exposing his thin, scarred arms. He placed his hands under the edge of the concrete slab. It was cold, rough, and unyielding. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the stale, dusty air. He knew that if he couldn't lift this, these dogs would die here in the dark, and part of him knew that if he walked away now, the last shred of his humanity would die with them. He gritted his teeth and pushed.
The concrete didn't budge. It sat there, an immovable object mocking his fragile attempt at heroism. John pushed until his vision blurred, black spots dancing in the dim orange light of the dying lighter. His boots slipped on the slick gravel, and his old back screamed in protest. He gasped for air, his lungs burning with the intake of dust and mold. He collapsed back against the tunnel wall, defeated. He was just a homeless man. A ghost. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who couldn't even save himself, let alone a creature trapped by tons of city rubble. The lighter flame dipped low, threatening to plunge them back into absolute darkness. But then he felt it. The puppy pressed its small body against his side, shivering. And from under the rock, the mother let out a soft, resigned sigh, closing her eyes as if accepting her fate. That sound, that acceptance of death, shattered something inside John. It unlocked a rage he hadn't felt in years, a rage against the cold, against the hunger, against the world that crushed the weak without a second thought. "No," John growled, "not today." He didn't just stand up, he rose with a fury that defied his starving body. He jammed his fingers deeper under the slab, not caring as the rough stone tore at his skin. He didn't think about his bad back. He didn't think about the physics. He thought about the life fading in front of him. He roared, a primal sound that drowned out the hum of the electric rails. Every muscle fiber in his body fired at once. His arms shook violently. The veins in his neck bulged like cords. Slowly, agonizingly, the concrete groaned. It lifted an inch, then two. The sound of grinding stone echoed like a gunshot in the silence. "Move!" John shouted through gritted teeth, sweat stinging his eyes. "Move, girl!" The mother dog understood. Summoning her last reserve of strength, she scrambled. Her paws scraped desperately against the dirt, dragging her injured body forward. She yelped as her hips cleared the weight, pulling herself free just as John's strength gave out. He let go. The slab crashed back down with a thud that shook the ground, sending a cloud of choking dust into the air. John fell to his knees, gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked at his hands. They were raw, bleeding, and trembling uncontrollably. But he was alive, and so was she. The mother dog didn't run. She dragged herself over to him, her back leg trailing uselessly behind her. She pushed her muzzle into his chest, licking the salt and grime from his face. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a pact. In that darkness, covered in filth, a bond was forged that was stronger than steel. The puppy jumped onto John's lap, licking his chin, its tail wagging a furious rhythm against his jacket. For the first time in 10 years, tears cut clean tracks through the dirt on John's face. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was the entire world to these two souls. But the relief was short-lived. A low rumble began to vibrate through the floor. The air pressure in the tunnel shifted, pushing a warm wind against his face. The tracks began to sing. A maintenance train was coming, and it was coming fast. John looked at the mother dog. Her leg was broken,
The bone was jutting out slightly, a gruesome sight in the flickering light. She couldn't walk, and they couldn't stay here. If the maintenance crew saw them, they'd call animal control, or worse, the train wouldn't see them at all in this bend of the tunnel. "We have to go," John whispered, panic rising in his throat. He took off his oversized, tattered army jacket, his most prized possession, the only thing that kept the winter out. He laid it on the ground. "Come on, girl." He gently maneuvered the heavy German shepherd onto the fabric. She whined but trusted him. He tied the sleeves around her chest and hoisted the bundle up. She was heavy, dead weight. The pain in John's back flared hot and sharp, nearly buckling his knees. He grunted, staggering under the load. The puppy danced around his feet, leading the way back. The rumble grew louder. A distant light began to paint the tunnel walls far behind them, growing brighter by the second. John took a step, then another. He wasn't walking, he was marching. Every step was a battle. The tunnel seemed to have stretched, the exit miles away. The sound of the approaching train became a roar, a mechanical monster hunting them in the dark. He saw the curve of the tunnel ahead, the point where the station lights would be visible, but his legs were turning to jelly. His vision was tunneling. He was starving, exhausted, and carrying 60 pounds of injured animal. He stumbled, his shoulder slamming into the wall. He almost dropped her. "Just a little more," he wheezed, tasting copper in his mouth. "Just a little more." He rounded the corner just as the blinding headlights of the maintenance train swept over the spot where they had been standing seconds ago. The screech of metal on metal was deafening. He didn't look back. He focused on the faint yellow glow of the station platform ahead. But as he reached the edge of the light, he saw something that made his blood run cold. 2 police officers were standing on the platform, directly in his path, their radios crackling. They were looking right at the tunnel entrance, right at him.
"Hey, you! Freeze!" The shout bounced off the tiled walls, sharp and authoritative. John froze, not because he wanted to, but because his legs finally refused to take another step. He stood at the edge of the platform, a specter of grime and blood clutching the heavy bundle in his arms. The puppy skidded to a halt beside him, letting out a sharp bark at the uniforms. The 2 officers approached cautiously, hands hovering near their belts. To them, John looked like a nightmare, wild-eyed, covered in tunnel slime, his hands stained red. "Put the bundle down," the taller officer commanded, his voice tight. "Hands where I can see them." "She's hurt," John croaked, his voice cracking. He didn't drop the jacket. He held it tighter, pulling it against his chest as if he could shield her from the world's judgment. The officer wrinkled his nose, stepping closer. He peered at the bundle. He saw the matted fur, the blood soaking through the army green fabric, the lifeless hang of the dog's head. His expression shifted from aggression to disgust. "It's a dead dog, pal," the officer scoffed, relaxing his stance, but waving a hand dismissively. "Leave it. Maintenance will handle the disposal." Disposal. The word hit John like a physical slap. To them, she was trash, just another piece of refuse clogging up the city's veins. But John felt the faint, erratic thumping of her heart against his own. She was fighting, and as long as she was fighting, he wouldn't stop. "She is not trash," John snarled. It was a low, dangerous sound that surprised even him. The officer blinked, taken aback by the sudden fire in the old man's eyes. Taking advantage of that split second of hesitation, John surged forward. He didn't attack, he fled. He threw himself toward the turnstiles, his boots slipping on the polished floor. "Hey, stop!" But John was already shoving through the metal gates. He didn't feel the bruise on his hip as he slammed into the turnstile. He didn't hear the angry shouts of the commuters he bumped into. All he heard was the puppy's claws clicking frantically on the stairs beside him. He burst out of the subway entrance and into the night. The city air was freezing and a sleeting rain had begun to fall, turning the streets into slick mirrors of neon light. The noise of the city, horns, sirens, chatter, was deafening after the silence of the tunnel. John was invisible again, but this time his invisibility was a curse. He stumbled down the sidewalk, the heavy weight of the German shepherd dragging his shoulders down. People parted like water around him, their faces twisting in revulsion. They saw a crazy homeless man carrying a dirty bundle. They didn't see the hero. They didn't see the life in hanging in balance. "Help!" John shouted, turning to a couple walking by. "Please, she's dying!" They didn't even break stride. The man pulled the woman closer, speeding up, eyes fixed on the pavement. John's heart sank. The mother dog let out a low, bubbling groan. She was getting colder. The shock was setting in. "Hold on," John whispered to the bundle, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "I know a place. Just hold on." He knew of a small charitable clinic 3 blocks away. He had walked past it 1,000 times looking at the pictures of happy pets in the window while his own stomach cramped with hunger. It was a long shot, a desperate shot, but it was the only one he had. He ran. Or rather, he shuffled as fast as his broken body would allow, the puppy nipping at his heels, urging him on. Every block felt like a marathon. His lungs burned, his arms were numb, his fingers locked into claws around the fabric of the jacket. He turned the corner. The clinic was there. The sign, St. Francis Animal Care, was dark. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. He stumbled up the steps and slammed his shoulder against the glass door. Locked. He peered inside. The waiting room was empty, illuminated only by a dim security light. "No, no, no," John sobbed, banging his fist against the glass. "Please, is anyone there?" Silence. Just the sound of the rain hissing on the asphalt and the distant wail of a siren. He slid down the doorframe, collapsing onto the wet concrete of the entryway. He cradled the mother dog's head in his lap. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. The puppy whined, curling up tightly against her mother's neck, trying to share its warmth. John looked up at the sky, letting the rain wash the tunneled dirt from his eyes. He had done everything. He had walked into the dark. He had lifted the stone. He had outrun the police. And he had failed. He bowed his head, defeated, ready to wait for the end. But then a flicker of light cut across the wet pavement. Inside the clinic, a door at the back of the hallway opened. A silhouette appeared, holding a janitor's mop. The figure paused, looking toward the front entrance, squinting at the frantic, disheveled shape huddled against the glass. John saw the movement. He didn't have the strength to shout. He just raised one trembling, bloody hand and placed it against the glass, begging with his eyes. The figure hesitated. Then slowly they started walking toward the door.
The lock turned with a sharp, metallic click that sounded like thunder in the quiet night. The door groaned open. Standing there was an older woman, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing faded scrubs and holding a ring of keys. She looked tired, the kind of deep, bone-weary exhaustion that mirrored John's own. Her eyes scanned John, the rags, the blood, the wild beard, and for a second he saw the familiar flicker of fear. "We're closed," she said, her voice guarded. "I'm just cleaning up. You can't be here." John didn't move. He couldn't. He simply tilted his bundle forward, peeling back the wet, muddy flap of his jacket to reveal the dog's face. The German shepherd's eyes were glassy, staring at nothing. Her breathing was a terrifyingly quiet rattle. "Please," John whispered. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for food. He just said one word, waited with every ounce of his soul. "Help." The woman looked down. Her eyes widened as she took in the crushed leg, the pale gums, the unmistakable signs of shock. The professional in her took over instantly, overriding the caution. She dropped her keys. "Bring her in," she ordered, her voice changing from defensive to commanding. "Now, to the back." John scrambled to his feet, adrenaline giving him one last burst of strength. He followed her through the pristine waiting room, his muddy boots leaving dark trails on the white linoleum. He didn't care.
He laid the dog onto the metal examination table the woman pointed to. The next hour was a blur of bright lights and beeping machines. The woman, Dr. Miller, her name tag read, worked with the speed and precision that mesmerized John. She intubated the dog, set up an IV line, and began cutting away the matted fur around the injury. John stood in the corner, pressing himself against the wall so he wouldn't contaminate the sterile space. He held his breath. The puppy sat at his feet, watching its mother with unblinking eyes. "She's lost a lot of blood," Dr. Miller said, not looking up as she cleaned the wound. "Her pelvis is fractured, and the leg, it's bad, very bad." She paused, looking at the monitor where the heart rate was erratic. "I have to operate now if she's going to make it, but I need to be honest with you. The drugs, the surgery, it's expensive, and the recovery—" She trailed off, looking at John's tattered clothes. He felt the familiar cold shame wash over him. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, 3/4, and a subway token. It was everything he had in the world. He walked over and placed it gently on the stainless steel counter. "It's not enough," he said softly. "I know, but I can work. I can clean the floors. I can take out the trash. I'll do anything. Just don't let her die." Dr. Miller looked at the small pile of change. Then she looked at John's hands, raw, bleeding, still trembling from the effort of lifting the concrete. She saw the way he looked at the dog, not as a pet, but as a lifeline. She sighed, a long, heavy sound. She pushed the money back toward him. "Keep your money," she said quietly. "You're going to need it for dog food." She turned back to the table, snapping on a fresh pair of gloves. "Get yourself cleaned up in the bathroom down the hall. There's a first aid kit under the sink for your hands. I've got a long night ahead of me." John sank onto a stool, burying his face in his hands. He wept, not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like physical pain. He stayed awake all night. He sat on the floor of the recovery room, listening to the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the monitor. The surgery was long. Dr. Miller had saved the leg with a metal pin. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft gray light through the blinds, the German shepherd stirred. She let out a soft whine. John was there instantly. He stroked her head, his touch gentle. She opened her eyes, hazy from the anesthesia, but clear. She looked at him, and then she gave a weak, thumping wag of her tail. The puppy scrambled up, curling into the crook of her mother's neck. The family was whole again. But as John looked at them, a new fear settled in. They were alive, yes, but they were homeless. He couldn't take a recovering dog back to the subway tunnels. He couldn't keep a puppy warm on a vent grate in the middle of winter. He had saved them, but he had nowhere to take them. Dr. Miller walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to John. It was warm, real coffee, the first he'd had in years. "She's a fighter," the doctor said, leaning against the doorframe. She took a sip, watching him closely. "I have a proposition for you, John. I need a night watchman, someone to keep an eye on the animals, clean the kennels, handle the late shift. There's a small room in the basement. It's warm. It has a cot. And," she pointed to the dogs, "it has room for them." John stared at her. He tried to speak, but his throat closed up. He looked around the clean, quiet room. He looked at the dogs who were alive because of him. And for the first time in 10 years, he didn't see a dead end.
he saw a beginning.
6 months later, the winter snow had melted, replaced by the vibrant green of spring. If you walked past the St. Francis Animal Clinic today, you might see a man sweeping the front steps. He wears a clean blue uniform, his beard is neatly trimmed, and there's a lightness in his step that wasn't there before. You wouldn't recognize him as the ghost who once haunted the subway platform. John stopped sweeping and leaned against the broom, wiping sweat from his brow. The door behind him pushed open, and 2 shapes burst out into the sunlight. The first was a ball of boundless energy, the puppy, now a lanky teenager named Spark, chasing a butterfly with clumsy enthusiasm. Behind him limped the mother, Grace. She moved slower than the pup, her hip stiff where the metal pin held the bone together. But her head was held high. Her coat, once matted with tunnel grime and blood, shone like burnished copper in the sun. She trotted up to John and sat by his feet, leaning her weight against his leg. It was their ritual, a silent check-in. I am here, you are here, we are safe. John reached down, burying his hand in her thick fur. He felt the scar on her hip, a tactile map of the night their lives changed. He remembered the darkness of the tunnel. He remembered the weight of the concrete slab, and he remembered the crushing loneliness that had been his only companion for years. People walked by on the sidewalk, but things were different now. A woman walking her poodle nodded at him. "Morning, John. Dogs are looking great today." "Morning, Mrs. Higgins," John replied, his voice strong and clear. He wasn't invisible anymore. Later that evening, after the clinic closed, John sat on his cot in the warm basement room. Spark was snoring softly on a rug, twitching in a dream. Grace was resting her head on John's knee, watching him with those deep, intelligent eyes. John looked at his hands. They were still calloused, still scarred, but they were no longer empty. He thought about that split-second decision on the platform, the moment he chose to step into the dark. He had gone down there thinking he was sacrificing himself to save a stray dog. He thought he was giving away the last bit of energy he had. But he was wrong. In the silence of the room, John realized the truth. Before that night, he was breathing, but he wasn't alive. He was just waiting for the end. It was the puppy's tug on his sleeve that woke him up. It was Grace's will to survive that reminded him how to fight. They gave him a job. They gave him a home. But most importantly, they gave him something he hadn't felt in a decade. They gave him a reason to wake up tomorrow. He leaned down and kissed the top of Grace's head. She let out a contented sigh, closing her eyes. "Thank you," John whispered into the quiet room. "Thank you for finding me." Because the truth is, in this cold and busy world, we often think we are the ones doing the rescuing. We think we are the heroes of the story. But sometimes, when you reach out your hand into the darkness to pull someone into the light, you find that they are pulling you up too. Sometimes, saving someone is also a way of saving yourself.